Everyone, I resisted the temptation to use the gavel, and I so wanted to. Later, Councillor Mantle, if you misbehave. I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers, and particularly members of the public who've come along this evening to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee clerk, Susan Ledane, to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending remotely, if there are any. Susan.
Good evening. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the results will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? Okay, I will now hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Susan. Item 1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from councillors Ruth Brown, Elizabeth Dennis, Sadie Billing and Amy Allen. Having given due notice, Councillor John Claydon will be substituting for Councillor Brown, Councillor Val Bryant will be substituting for Councillor Billing, and Councillor Sean Nolan will be substituting for Councillor Allen. Are there any further apologies? No? Okay. Item 2, notification of other business. There is none. Item 3, Chair's announcements. 1, recording. In accordance with the council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available both on the council's YouTube channel as well as on the council's ModGov site alongside the documents from this meeting. Declaration of interests. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. 3, to clarify matters for the registered speakers. Members of the public in groups of supporters or objectors will have up to 3 minutes per person. When there is only one public supporter or objector, then that member of the public will have up to 5 minutes. There are separate groups for people registered as member advocate objectors, member advocate supporters and for the applicant, their agent or representative. This is up to 5 minutes per group. All speakers will receive a warning when you have 1 minute remaining. Following a conclusion of your time, members will be invited to ask points of clarification. At the end of your allotted time, you'll be advised that the time allowed has ended and you must cease, and I'll be as gentle as possible. Section 4.8.23a. For the purposes of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and the consideration for that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. Public participation. I have a list of public participants. If you could just indicate, like a school register, if you could just indicate if you're here for me, thank you. I have Peter Gartside. Welcome, Peter. William Looker. Councillor Martin Prescott. Philip Kratz, Neil Dodds, Heather Cotton, Councillor Val Bryant, who I believe is here as in place of Councillor Ian Albert, Guy Foxall, and Louise Morton. Thank you very much. So we move on. Item 5, application 24/01962 FP, land adjacent to Redbridge Cottage, the street Kelshall, SG89SQ. Alex Howard to present. Alex.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. One update for you this evening, which concerns a written update that was circulated to members yesterday. This was posted on the website for this meeting. The update concerns the receipt of a formal response from the North Herts Council Technical Project Officer, who also deals with applications for public right-of-way diversions under the Town and Country Planning Act. These comments are available on the council's website and were appended to that written update, which notably includes a recommended condition that deals with the footpath diversion application itself. This condition is put forward by officers to be included in the recommendation to members of the planning committee this evening, which would be an additional condition number 12. Is there no further updates? If we go to the presentation, please. Thank you. So the site is a parcel of land located adjacent to Red Brick Cottage and is on the northeast side of the street in Kelshaw. The site is split from the street by a mature hedgerow, which has been partially removed to facilitate vehicular access to the dwelling currently under construction in the northern part of the site. There is a public footpath that runs in a diagonal line through the site from the southernmost corner to the north of the site. Kelshaw is designated as a Category B village, and all of the site is within the rural area beyond the green belt as per the adopted North Herts local plan. Next slide, please. So this is a photo from the street, looking sort of southeast. You are able to sort of make out the extent of the mature hedgerow that fronts the highway and the previously existing access to the site on the left there, which is to be stopped up and landscaped in accordance with the approved planning permission on this site. You can also see the front driveway areas of the properties opposite the site on the right of that image. Next slide, please. This is just another view slightly further down the street, and you can see the extent of the hedgerow that's been removed to facilitate the formation of the access for the approved dwelling currently being built at the site. Next slide, please. Again, just another photo sort of looking back into the site from the other side of that recently formed access. You can see obviously the presence of construction materials and related machinery currently on the site. Next slide, please. And this is again just a sort of another photo further down the street, looking northwest towards the site access. Next slide, please. This is a view from further down the street, sort of looking towards the southernmost corner of the site. This is where the existing public right-of-way begins and crosses the field diagonally to the northernmost corner of that field. Next slide, please. And this is a photo sort of from behind that field gate that you would have just seen, looking sort of towards into the site. You can see obviously the approved dwelling is currently being constructed, and the fence line that you can kind of make out there is the public right of way that crosses it in that diagonal line. Next slide, please. And this is just another picture from photo, sorry, from that view, that position, sort of showing the extent of the site in the northern direction. Next slide, please. And again, just another view from a similar position, sort of looking into the site there. You can kind of make out the extent and size of the mature hedgerow on the left, and obviously the building going on at the moment for the other dwelling approved on the site. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot from Google Maps, just sort of to show the site in context with its immediate neighbours to the south and west, as well as the copse beyond which is a further neighbouring property. You can also kind of make out the diagonal line through the site, which is that public right of way in a south-north direction. Next slide, please. So this is the site location plan showing the outline of the site in red and the other land within the ownership of the applicant in blue. This plan indicates the approximate position of the approved dwelling on the site, which is being constructed. And I think this plan also sort of helps to show the sort of sporadic small clusters of built form in this village. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed site layout plan. Obviously shows the location of the proposed dwelling on the site, the extent of the dwelling's residential curtilage, new hard and soft landscaping across the site and its boundaries, the proposed shared access and visibility splays with the dwelling currently being constructed, which is also shown on this plan for clarity. The plan also shows the existing public right-of-way through the site in that north-south direction and the proposed diversion route, which would be around the plot's boundary in a sort of dogleg. Next slide, please. So this is just a blown-up screenshot in the top left corner of that previous plan showing the street scene elevation. I thought it'd be worth members having a look at this in a sort of on its own. So it shows obviously the approved dwelling on the left, the proposed dwelling on the right, and obviously sited behind the mature hedgerow with that central access point. That's, as you've seen, already happened. Next slide, please. These are just the proposed floor plans, roof plans, elevations and sections for that dwelling. The dwelling is designed to mirror the form, proportions and general external appearance of the dwelling that is currently being constructed. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed soft landscaping plan for the site, sort of just showing the hedgerows and tree planting that's to be retained and proposed. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is just sort of taken from the submitted design and access statement. It's just a sort of 3D visual of what the dwelling is planned to look like when completed. Next slide, please. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alex. Before I take questions from the committee, just for the benefit of the members of the public, when I ask for questions after someone's spoken, my question is only aimed at the committee who are in the front row. It's not a free for all. So just to clarify that. So, do we have any questions for the planning officer from the planning committee? I have Councillor Louise Pearce was first off the mark.
Thank you. It's probably a question in two parts, I think. So this is a self-build application, as far as I'm aware. And I think from what I read in the report, that means that BNG doesn't apply if it's a self-build. So firstly, is that the case? And secondly, if something is described as a self-build, how do you ensure that it is a self-build?
It's a good question. So yes, firstly, self and custom build dwellings are exempt from the mandatory BNG legislation to deliver that 10% gain that came in, I think, in February or April this year. In response to your other question, it's a little bit less clear. Obviously, we take the assertion that it's self-build at face value. I understand Sean might be able to advise, but if we were a CIL authority, it would be quite easy to enforce, but North Herts isn't a CIL authority. So I don't know if you want to sort of touch on anything that I've maybe missed, Sean, just to answer that question in full.
This is something that the government is looking at because it is an exemption from the BNG regulations. There's no provision set up in the regulations for ensuring that it is actually custom build or self build. It's based upon what the applicant proposes. If we, as Alex said, if we were a CIL authority, then that has specific provisions following occupation and 3 years after to ensure that the occupier is the person who put themselves forward for the self build. The reason for that is with CIL, you're talking about tens of thousands of pounds of contributions that people would not otherwise have paid. And so there has to be some kind of legal provision to ensure it is for self-build. That level of legal provision isn't there for biodiversity net gain exemption, but the government is looking at this. It's one of the issues that they are very much aware of.
Thanks, Sean. Councillor Tom Tyson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. One is just a very simple one about the height of the hedge at the front there. Obviously, there's on the photographs, there are 2 openings at the moment, but there will be only one if this were to go ahead as proposed. My notes say that that hedge is 2.5 metres high. Is that actually the case? I mean, maybe not now, but
I've not
high.
been able to measure it, but it's quite a mature hedge, as you can see from the photos, and on all plans that I've seen, it's been noted as 2.5 meters in height. Yes, correct.
Second question is it relates to the appeal which was upheld. Are we allowed to talk about that? Is it pertinent what the appeal inspector said about the previous existing site?
So the appeal decision is a material consideration, and I have considered this in the report in terms of what the inspector said at that point, and the fact that obviously since that appeal decision, the council has approved amendments to that scheme under delegated powers, which is obviously different in terms of its design and scale to what was allowed at appeal. And basically the design of this scheme is designed to reflect those changes. So if there are questions, I can try and answer them.
For the sake of it, in case it slipped anyone's mind, BNG is biodiversity net gain. Any other questions from members of the committee? I've two now. Councillor Sean Nolan.
Thanks, Chair. In relation to the extra piece that we got through yesterday, just to confirm, does that mean that all works required to reroute the public footpath that currently exists would have to be completed prior to any other works? So that would include the sort of hedging and other bits that have been included.
So what the formal response from the technical officer yesterday essentially says is that under the Town and Country Planning Act, the applicant would have to apply to North Herts to divert that footpath. There are separate regulations whereby, for example, if you need a temporary stopping up order, you have to go to the Highway Authority, which is what the current formal response in the report basically says. It is entirely possible that if planning permission was granted tonight and the applicant applied to divert the footpath, there's no guarantee that it would be approved. But it's a separate legal matter that needs to be addressed outside of planning control. But what this condition does is make sure that the applicant at least submits that application before, commencement takes place.
Councillor John Clayton.
Thank you. Just following Councillor Peace's question, I'm just wondering, was the application that was approved after appeal last time also submitted as a self-build?
No, it wasn't. And I think I know where you're going with this, but because of when it was submitted, it would have been pre the mandatory biodiversity net gain. If that's kind of what you were asking.
Yeah, I would have been asking how you reconcile building two houses for yourself.
So, yeah.
Okay. Do we have any further questions to the officer? No? In which case, may I call the first public objector, Peter Gartside? Peter, you have 3 minutes to speak, and I'll let you know when you have a minute left as gently as I can. Okay.
Peter Gartside. I've lived in Kelshall for 35 years, and I'm representing the Kelshall Parish Meeting along with my colleague, William Looker. We prepared an explanatory illustration to enable you to understand the evolution of this infill within infill development, but have misunderstood the procedure and are unable to throw it up in this case. We will do our best to give an explanation though. The series of applications covering this site is one of 4 other applications under the auspices of the Category B status for Kelshall, allowing for infill. Parishioners have not objected to the other 3, other than question affordability, so this is not a NIMBY objection. The parish meeting has objected to this development from the beginning, when the initial application was made for this site in 2022. Its objection was based on the view that it was not an appropriate infill site. This view was shared by the councillors and the council, meeting as we are today, and the application was turned down. In considering the present application, I would ask you to remember this. The council did not consider the site suitable for infill. This was all in the context of the planning officer in the case of the first infill application, stating in the context of Category B infill, the issue is not that more development will be encouraged in the village, rather that it will be delivered in a measured, appropriate and sensitive manner. I would ask you also to remember this statement: measured, appropriate and sensitive in the context of the application before us. The applicant appealed and the appeal was upheld. I see under 4310 of the statement before us, there is a rebuttal of objectors' reference to the council's failure to submit a statement of case. The fact is that the inspector felt it necessary to comment at the beginning of his report that he had not received a statement of case from the council. Having attended such a hearing recently, I found the inspector a stickler for protocol. The inspector's subsequent report made little reference to the council's case or position, but takes on board a lot of the arguments in favour of the development in the applicant's grounds for appeal report. Let me share some of the references in this statement with you. It repeatedly refers to the appropriateness of a single dwelling and the plot's classification, reinforced by the planning officer, as a small infill. It draws attention to the sky gaps and open character and points to gaps
May I
on the
ask you to
side of
wind
the
up?
house
Yeah.
that preserve the overall character and appearance of the village and street scene. And under 623, the appeal site is spacious and would contain one suitably sized and designed dwelling and single-storey garage outbuilding.
May I ask you to conclude, please?
Sorry?
May I ask you to conclude?
Right. Sorry.
You can finish your sentence, it's fine.
Oh, right. Planning authority control no further buildings on this site, it said. Have I come to an end?
You have.
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
And my apologies. I did try and give you a 1 minute warning, but unfortunately, the microphone didn't work, so you may not have heard me. I was very lenient at the end. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Peter. Can I ask the planning committee, do you have any questions to Peter? None? Okay. In which case, can I call William Looker? William, you've got 3 minutes, and I will try and tell you when there's 1 minute so you hear me this time. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm William Looker. I've been a resident of the street for 10 years now. Knowing that I've only got a very short time, I'm wondering whether I should answer some of the questions you had. It has been applied for self-build status. The previous house wasn't under self-build status. The guy who bought it bought 425k for the plot. It's only viable as a development site if he builds 2 houses. So he had the intention of building 2. From what I could find from planning history, he's built at least one other house and sold it in Essex. A lot of the other councils don't let you search by name. So just to cover that first, we did see some beautiful maps up showing the open nature of the landscape around there. What you didn't see is that there's 10 footpaths with clear visibility of this site. The ridgeline is 9 meters above the roadway, and this house will be able to see from quite some distance and have an impact on the landscape. For whatever reason, we don't get supplied with a landscape impact assessment. Okay, so just to cover some points that haven't been covered so far. This is really clearly an example of planning creep. As you can see, it started as an agricultural field. They've had garages, outbuildings added, garages changed to houses. The further house that was one on appeal. Now this second dwelling that requires the footpath to be moved because another development couldn't happen without it. I don't think had the planning inspector been presented with all of the houses and development that have been on this site in the last couple of years, that he would have accepted it. It clearly is oversized and changes the character of the village. It is much larger. There is very limited gap between the 2 buildings, unlike other houses along the street. It's 5-bedroom house. It's massive. It offers no strategic importance. It fails to meet the 5 environmental objectives, 8 economic objectives, and 4 social objectives set out in the local plan. Kelshaw's seen massive growth already in the local plan period. We've got to 20% growth so far. This exceeds the local plan's intention of 6.5% district-wide. Hitchin, for example, over the entire plan period only gets 5.5% growth. So obviously there's a concentration here on a category B village, which has very limited infrastructure, which can't really sustain the overdevelopment. The sewage works in particular are the worst performing sewage works in the district, overflowing untreated sewage into the small chalk stream 32 times in 2023 for 244 hours total. It's accessible only through a very narrow lane with no passing places, posing risk for safety of pedestrians and horses. It really is a disproportionate in scale. It's a metre and a half above the ridgeline of the opposing houses. Its self-build status obviously is very
If I can
questionable.
ask you to wind up, please.
And I'd like you to consider rejecting this really because it's out of character and scale of the street. It's a massive structure. From 60% of the angles you can view it from, it would appear as one 50-metre long building, 9 metres high.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. May I ask, do we have any questions for William from the committee? None? Okay. In which case, can I call ward member objector, Councillor Martin Prescott? Martin, you have 5 minutes, and I will let you know when you have a minute left.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a timer on the screen. I could see it. I'm not going to take 5 minutes. I sat on planning committees like this for many, many years, and I wish I had a fiver for every time I've had this kind of argument come towards me. This business of the slow creep of development. The developer puts in planning permission on a small property. Can you hear me? This microphone seems to be cutting out from time to time. It puts in an application for a small property, either gets it approved or wins it on appeal, extends it a little bit, gets the house that he or she wants in the end. And then in this case, you get a second property, which comes as a second application that comes along for another house. And you think, well, it's only a little bit more than the original one. It's probably all right. It's the old concept of the frog in a saucepan. A little bit here, a little bit there. And I entirely understand where the planning office is coming from. You can only deal with planning considerations. You can't turn it down because you don't like it, or you don't like the applicant, or you don't like the color of the wall. Or you have to come up with the planning considerations. But there comes a point when any rational person would look at it and say, when is enough enough? The planning inspector clearly made points about spaciousness, about sky gaps, and I'm tempted to suggest that the planning inspector probably wouldn't have allowed the appeal even on the first property had the property been submitted in its present form. Okay, so that ship has sailed. The appeal was allowed. The officers since then have allowed the slight adjustments to the shape and size, but it is a big house. The initial design we saw, the diagram we saw, I thought was significant because it didn't show the size of the house in comparison with the other houses, but there are drawings which do, and it's very clearly much bigger than all the surrounding properties. That aside, if you then put the second property, which I accept all the things that the planning officer, and it's a good report, and the planning officer took the time to meet me on site, and we had a look around as far as we were able to, and there are very logical arguments why it should be approved. But there are also logical arguments why it should be rejected. One of which, and the significant one being, it's far too big for the area. And when you take the two houses together, it's enormous in comparison with what is there at the moment. And it is going to change the character of that little village. It's not a big village. And as has been said before, you put the two properties together, and because they are very, very close proximity, it is going to look like one enormous house. I think so. The size and bulk of the development taken as a whole, and I accept the ship has sailed on the first one. I get that. But when you take the two together, which inevitably you have to, because when you're looking at them, it is a big, big development. And I would urge the planning committee to consider that, to consider how much of a big development it actually is in comparison from what else is in the village. And then that's fine. We know we need more houses, and we know people have a right to live and all the rest of it. But there comes a point when you say, if essentially you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, when you look at the character of these local villages, very small rural communities, and when you add more and more and more bigger and bigger and bigger buildings, you are changing it. So I personally think that's grounds for at least serious consideration of refusal. And in closing, just a small point, and I noticed from the letter just recently received about the footpath itself, and I quote, "At no point shall the public footpath be blocked or access impeded until such times as both the above criteria are satisfied," namely the getting permission. And Alex will back me up on this. There is no way on earth you could walk across that footpath now because it's filled up with building materials, and you just simply can't get across. That's not necessarily a reason to refuse, but it does show the intent, I think, of the developer to kind of ride roughshod over the regulations and get what he or she wants. I would urge the committee to give serious consideration to refusing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prescott. Can I ask if the committee have any points of clarification to Councillor Prescott? No? Right, in which case, then could I ask the applicant's representative, Philip Kratz? Philip, you have 5 minutes and I'll warn you when you've got a minute left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members, for the opportunity to speak. I will respond to some of the things that have been raised in the questions as well if I have time in my 5 minutes. I didn't intend taking up the full 5 minutes, but planning really is quite a simple thing. Is the principle okay, is the first question that you ask. And if the principle is okay, then are the details okay? And it's as simple as that. And to take those questions in that order, Kelshaw is designated as a Category B village within the council's own local plan. And there's an imperative policy saying that infilling development which does not extend the built core of the village will be allowed. So if you like, that's been clarified by the inspector's appeal decision. It's blown away the mists of ambiguity, and we now know that this site as a whole is capable of being an infill plot. So that doubt is removed. Once that doubt is removed, then the principle of development must be okay. It must be. There's no way you could attack that. So you look at the actual dwelling itself, and there's a number of issues to be addressed. Firstly, the impact on the character of the area. Well, as your officer has explained, and I'll stop there and say that your officers really did do a good job in liaising with the architect agent on the application and squaring all the circles that were evident in the application. And so far as the character of the area goes, as has been explained, it's a mirror image of the one next door. It's not identical. That might look a little bit strange. It's a mirror image. It's only got single-story eaves heights. So the impression it gives is of a single-story dwelling, but it is a big dwelling. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's a 5-bedroomed or a 4 bedrooms is academic because there's only 4 bedrooms upstairs and the rooms have been labelled. But the character of the area, it's self-evident that it reflects the character of the area because it's similar to the one next door. The next question is to do with the impact on neighbouring properties. What used to be called the principles of good neighbourliness. Is that overlooking, overshadowing, domineering impact? And the answer to all of the questions is no, because it's been designed out of the scheme. There is no overlooking, there is no overshadowing, there is no loss of privacy, there is no dominating impact on the neighbouring properties. So that has been designed away. Then there's, if you like, the technical issues, the access, parking and highways and flooding. And we know that all of those are okay because the relevant technical authorities have come back and said that they're okay. So far as the public rights of way go, there is a due process, as has been explained, and that due process must be gone through. And in that context, the applicant confirms that all of the proposed conditions, including the one that came out yesterday, are completely acceptable, and that deals with all the issues. And in anticipation of what might be asked by members in a moment, due to the wonders of modern science, I've managed to access the Self-Building Custom House Building Act 2015 on my phone. There are definitions in there, and the explanatory note says that self-building custom house building covers a wide spectrum from projects where individuals are involved in building or managing the construction of their home from beginning to end, to those where they make decisions from a developer about what the end product will be. And I have to emphasize that there was no ulterior motive in avoiding BNG, because the BNG was
1 minute.
Thank you very much. Very much a side issue. A full ecological preliminary appraisal was done, and a full designed landscaping scheme has been prepared by Ligna Consultancy, who specialise in the BNG as well. And I have no doubt at all that the scheme would have been BNG compliant had that been the case. As your officers have explained, it's a different kettle of fish if you were a SIL authority where tens of thousands of pounds would have been at stake, but you're not. So there is absolutely no ulterior motive there. To add all that up, if the principle of development is okay and the design of the dwelling, the details are okay, I think that it's a struggle to find any coherent and defensible reason for refusal. And so your officer's considered recommendation is commended to you, and I'd be delighted to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So do the committee have any points of clarification for Philip? Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. I wonder if you can clarify why an application for 2 dwellings was not submitted originally.
The short answer is no. It's because originally an application was made for 1 dwelling. Again, I don't think there was any ulterior motive behind it. I'd always loved to think that the world at large was full of really clever conspiracies, and that people were doing things with long lead-in times to to ultimate ends. But I've never seen it in all my experience, and given that this is a single plot in the village of Kelshall, I doubt very much whether there was any conspiratorial theory behind that. I think that the application was made for a single dwelling, and it was approved on appeal, and then things have moved on from there as the applicant has looked at and considered what is possible on this plot.
Do we have any other questions? Councillor Clayton.
Sorry, me again.
No,
I just wonder if you could comment on the visibility of the site from surrounding paths, which has been highlighted by some of the objectors. Once the soft landscaping is in place, how visible will these houses be from surrounding footpaths?
Obviously, they'd be visible, and as ever, the quality of the design really mitigates against any harm, because the fact you can see something doesn't mean that there's harm. There has been a worked up landscaping scheme proposed. Notwithstanding that, there is a condition requiring details of it to be, if you like, resubmitted, together with further details as well. And one of the members raised the question of the height of the hedge on the frontage. I think it is about 2.5 meters, but I've never had occasion to measure it. But that could be maintained at that height if the council so wish by approving the scheme under condition 4 of the proposed conditions. So yes, it will be visible. Yes, it will be ameliorated by landscaping, a proper landscaping scheme. And I think the corollary of the single-story eaves and the disguising its bulk by the H form of layout with relatively narrow spans, relatively low ridge heights, is that there won't be any harm. So you can see it, but there won't be any harm as a result of that.
Okay. Do we have Councillor Peace?
Thank you. I just wondered if you could maybe comment on, I think, a point raised by Councillor Prescott, that currently the footpath across the site is inaccessible, and what can be done to rectify that, please?
I spent many years in local government, and I spent some of that time dealing with public rights of way. As your officers have explained, there's 2 aspects to it. One is under the Highways Acts and one under the Planning Acts. In neither occasion should a public right of way be blocked. To be brutally frank, I didn't appreciate the fact that it is completely blocked. When I went to the site, and it was a little while ago, I could follow the line of it. If it's blocked, then it shouldn't be. And in mitigation, it's not a material consideration for this application, but I'm sure the applicant will be put right, because he'll be put right by me in the morning to sort it out.
Do we have any further questions? No? Sorry. Oh, just in time. Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I was just looking at local plan, and in the design section, it does suggest that a landscape and visual impact assessment should be undertaken. I can't find one in the documents associated with this application. Has one been undertaken? Is one on its way?
I'll contextualise the answer to this. When the coalition government came in, whenever it was 15 years ago, and abolished the 12,000 pages of planning guidance and replaced it with a 58-page long NPPF, the next thing that happened was a 470-page long guide to landscape and visual impact assessments came out. I've never known one be done for a single dwelling. They're normally done for something which is much more strategic. So if it were an estate, I would possibly expect an LBIA to be required. I've never known one for a single dwelling or for anything less than about 50 dwellings, come to that. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No? In which case, can I ask the officer to respond to any issues raised, Alex?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I have anything further to add that isn't already covered in my officer report. So I think I'll leave it there. That's okay.
Thank you. So the officer's recommendation is to grant permission with an additional condition of 12 as condition 12 as outlined in the supplementary document. Can I have a proposer of a motion to approve, refuse, or defer the application? Councillor Tyson.
Well, just to get things going, I shall propose that we accept the recommendation to approve.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder for that? I don't know who was first. Councillor Bryant. Yeah. Councillor Val Bryant, second.
Including the additional condition.
Yeah. And can I confirm that that proposal is including the additional condition 12? It is. Right. In which case, we're open to debate, councillors. Councillor Val Bryant.
I think no matter what our own thoughts are about the motivation or timing of this application, I can see no reason why we shouldn't accept it. No material planning reasons why we shouldn't accept this application.
Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I'm also of the opinion that as whatever your thoughts are about the application's applicants' motives and the sequence of what's gone on in terms of extending the original application and then adding another one on the site. We've got to judge these things on planning law, not on what Councillor Prescott called logical arguments. And some of these points that have come up aren't really sort of particularly pertinent in planning terms. So we've got an appeal that was upheld because this is an infill site and it's been described as an infill on an infill, but it's still a valid infill site in the opinion of the planning inspector. And it doesn't extend the core of the village. Anything you build in a village is going to have some impact on the character of the surrounding area. But what the question is it a harmful impact or not? And I think that in the way that this has been designed, the impact is not, so harmful as to outweigh the benefits of it. And so that's why I'm going to vote in favour of this application.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Does any other member wish to speak or comment? No. In which case, if we can, we'll move towards a vote. We have a proposer. We have a proposal to approve. With the additional condition 12 as outlined as well. Could we take a vote on that, please? Voting.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you, Susan. Can I suggest we take a brief break before the next item, apart from anything else, to allow Councillor Bryant to change hats to speak in the next debate? Okay. Okay. Okay, we set. Okay. Thank you. Item 7, application 2402173 FP, Anderson House, Florence Street, Hitchin. May I ask Tom Ray to present?
Thank you, Chair. I do have just a couple of updates for the meeting this evening. Members will have noted the addendum report published on the website this week, covering various updates to the report and the requested additional planning condition to the officer recommendation. So that would be condition 12 concerning the submission of a nominations agreement. In addition to that, Chair, I have received one further letter from a local resident who lives along the Nightingale Road part of the site. And that resident wishes to raise a number of issues. Some of them have been covered already in the report, but if I could just read those out. The resident seeks reassurance on a number of issues, and these include that all of the 10 windows facing properties in Nightingale Road are glazed with obscure glazing with shutters to prevent light pollution. That a higher boundary fence be erected along the southern boundary of the site. That no access of residents of the Anderson House property shall have any access along the southern boundary. That cameras are placed along the green spaces outside the property and along the boundaries. That the applicant involves a local community with regular updates and listens to any concerns of antisocial behaviour. That there are 24-hour staff on the premises, and that there are a number of that the number of proposed clients within the development be reduced on the basis that 86 is felt to be too many clients for the building. The resident also queries why there may well be two hostels within 70 metres of each other. And finally, that the resident would like to know who is accountable for any problems that might arise at the site. There is one further outstanding matter, Chairman, and that is a consultation response that is due from the National Health Service, Hertfordshire and West Essex Integrated Care Team. That is due by 13th of December. Therefore, I would ask that the recommendation at paragraph 6.1 is altered to await this response and to read as follows. That planning permission be granted subject to A, the receipt of formal comments from the NHS, Hertfordshire and West Essex Integrated Care Team within the statutory consultation period. B, for the committee to delegate authority to the Development and Conservation Manager in consultation with the chair of the Planning Committee to resolve any issues arising from the consultation response from the NHS, and then subject to the conditions which are set out in the report. So, Chair, that concludes my updates. So if I could just now go through to the slides, please. First slide, please. This slide shows the extent of the application site in Florence Street, which is just off Nightingale Road. The site extends to over 1/2 hectare and is close to the Nightingale Road neighbourhood centre, which comprises several shop units. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the scale of the existing 2-storey building from within Florence Street. The building was constructed as a purpose-built development for sheltered accommodation in 1985. The site has a secure boundary with Florence Street, and you can see from this photograph it comprises brick walls and iron railing fencing. This photograph also shows the secondary site access. Next slide, please. This is the main vehicular access to the site in the northwestern corner of the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the scale and the depth of the building across its northern elevation. You'll also see in the foreground there the access point. Next slide, please. This shows the existing car parking area, which currently accommodates 19 car parking spaces and bin storage area. Next slide, please. This slide shows one of the southern wings of the development as viewed from properties in Nightingale Road. Next slide, please. This slide also shows the southerly projecting wings to the development, but this view being taken from the car park at the adjacent veterinary surgery. Next slide, please. This slide shows part of the external amenity space. This particular section will be reserved for the young adult clients. Next slide, please. This slide shows the southern boundary fencing and the space between that boundary and the nearest part of the building. It's about 2.5 to 3 meters in width. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the windows on the southern elevation to be obscure glazed with restricted openings. Next slide, please. This part of the site along the southern boundary will be reserved for emergency access only and does not form part of any of the garden areas for the clients. Next slide, please. This slide shows the garden area set aside for the adult clients. The landscaping along the eastern boundary here is all shown to be retained on the submitted drawings. Next slide, please. This slide is a photograph of the internal of the site, showing an existing cycle store. This store will be demolished and rebuilt at the front of the site, and in its place there will be a single-story storage building erected. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the western boundary of the site, and along virtually the whole of this eastern boundary rather, is this very high boundary wall which separates the site from the properties in Kings Road. Next slide, please. This photograph is taken from within the amenity area, looking southwards towards the Nightingale Road properties. Next slide, please. And again, this is another photograph looking from the amenity areas back towards the southern boundary and the Nightingale Road properties. Next slide, please. So this photograph is taken from one of the projecting wings within the corridor, and it shows the proximity of the development to the adjoining gardens at the back of the Nightingale Road properties. The proposal is this window, along with all other first floor windows along that part of the site, will be obscure glazed, and all of the openings will have restricted opening mechanisms. Next slide, please. Again, this shows a view from one of the apartments looking towards the gardens, and you can see here quite clearly of the quite close proximity and the overlooking from the building into rear gardens. Next slide, please. Again, looking from the windows within the development, this particular one overlooks the veterinary surgery car park. Next slide, please. Again, here, this slide demonstrates how at the moment the windows along this boundary are not restricted in any way and also not obscure glazed. Next slide, please. This is the currently the internal communal area. This will be retained as part of the development, split into two areas, one for the young adult clients, the other for the adult clients, and it will be a combination of dining rooms and communal living areas. Next slide, please. This photograph overlooks the front car park and the current refuse arrangements, which will be moved to the northern boundary of the site within an enclosure along the northern boundary. Next slide, please. So this is the location plan of the site. It's, as you can see there, it's a sizable building on a large plot with the surrounding land use predominantly in residential use. Next slide, please. This shows the block plan for the site with the two projecting wings to the south of the site, which I mentioned. And the layout here shows that the two amenity areas, one in between the two wings and one to the right-hand side for the clients of the development. There will be, as I mentioned earlier, this 2.5 to 3 meter buffer along the southern boundary, which will have a restricted access. Next slide, please. This is the existing ground floor of the building and the part of the car park. There are no extensions to the building at all, apart from the single-story storage building, which I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. This is the first floor of the existing building, showing the apartments within the building. There are currently 48, and those 48 units will be retained as part of the new use. Next slide, please. This is the proposed ground floor plan, again showing the amenity areas. The only difference on this plan to the existing arrangements is that some of the kitchens within the apartments will be converted into bedrooms. So the apartments will have, in some cases, shared living arrangements. Next slide, please. This is the first floor and a similar layout with some internal alterations only. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the elevations of the development, existing elevations. On this drawing, it's difficult to see, but there's clear annotation that on the two projecting southern wings, all the first floor windows on those end units will be obscure glazed with restricted opening mechanisms. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of my presentation. I do have Martin Lawrence, the Council Strategic Housing Manager, with me to assist the committee on any queries relating to the background of the proposal and housing policy matters locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Did you have anything to add, Martin, or at this stage? Thank you. In which case, can I ask the committee if you have any questions for the officer, please? Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the statutory consultee who's yet to respond, that we're expecting a response from still, and I guess this is probably a bit asking you to predict the future in some respects, but is there anything you can foresee in terms of their response that could provide any sort of material issues at all? Is there anything that we should be concerned about the fact they haven't responded yet and that may come out that could affect the view in terms of whether planning permission is acceptable or not for this site?
Was that the NHS?
Yes, yeah.
The reason why I consulted the NHS was because in representations that were made during the consultation process, a number of residents mentioned the impact on local infrastructure, of which surgeries are part of that. So that was the reason I consulted the NHS. But in my opinion, it's unlikely that they'll be asking for any contributions on a development of this scale, particularly where there's no increase in floor space or no increase in units on the site. That's my view. It would be unlikely to ask for contributions. But if they were to ask for some kind of contribution, my recommendation is that between my manager and the chair of the committee, we resolve those issues. If need be.
Thanks, Tom. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether you could comment on why you think previously approved planning applications for similar purposes for sites in Hitchin and Letchworth have previously not been acted upon, and whether any of those may also apply in this case, or whether it's less likely.
I don't know the ins and outs of all of those sites. I'm more familiar with the existing hospital around the corner. That's a very difficult site to develop, as you might imagine, with the river course right next door to it. It's a very restricted site. It has now got planning permission for an increase in units to 23, but it will be a very difficult site to develop from a point of view of construction, etc. And this particular site does seem, with an existing building, to be converted to be more attractive, really, in terms of the funding at stake as well. I think there's another site in Letchworth, which Pixmore Avenue, I think, was the location. I understand there that that wasn't viable at the end of the day, with one of the landowners seeking, a financial contribution, which made the scheme unviable.
Thank you. Councillor Clayton, you're about to press the button.
I've actually got a couple more questions, if I may.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask firstly about parking. I understand that the requirement for parking is deemed, the provision of parking is deemed sufficient in this case. I just wonder whether that accounts for expected requirements for staff as well as for residents. So the management plan provided by the applicant outlines around 14 FTE worth of staff. I recognise that not all of them will be on site the whole time, but presumably at least some of those will require parking.
Factored into the overall parking standard. But as I mentioned in the report, I would imagine the majority of the spaces will be used by staff or visiting workers. In my view, from experience, there is very low car ownership amongst the clients.
And finally, just on the southern border fence, you mentioned amongst the things mentioned by the residents was a suggestion of raising the height of that fence. Is there? Forgive me, I can't remember whether that was part of the application or not. Is that likely to happen as part of?
It's not currently part of the application. Those fences are about 1.8 high in most places. In some places they are higher. It does vary along that length of the southern boundary. But it would be possible if members were minded to request some additional height or landscaping along that boundary if it was deemed necessary.
Councillor Peace.
I can see that one of the objectors, maybe some of the objectors, have queried the need for this provision, and I know that we have some information that's quite clear in our report. I wondered whether it would just be worth outlining what the need is, just for the members of the public who are here and who are watching online.
Perhaps I could bring in my colleague.
Yes,
Mark
please.
Lawrence on that point, Martin, would you mind?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So, in terms of housing demand, you've got the figures in the report there that Mr. Ray's put together. There's several layers of demand. There's people we have to accommodate as a local housing authority. So we've accommodated people today, for example, who've come to our office with nowhere to live. There's other people who are vulnerable who we don't necessarily have to accommodate. And that sounds counterintuitive, but when you have a scarce resource, a scarce supply of accommodation, you can't always accommodate everybody. And then there's another layer who you don't have to accommodate at all because they don't meet legal thresholds, they're not deemed technically vulnerable at that point in time. And they're people we would signpost to private rented sector rooms and so on. And we would pick them up if there were space. There's a fourth layer of demand of people who disengage when they realise they won't get accommodation. That's really unquantifiable. The first three, we can say we could fill this unit several times over. And the fourth, unquantifiable layer, I hate to think how big that is. And for a relatively a medium-sized district, if you like, the amount of the size of our population, we have about 50 bed spaces for single people as of today. So this is potentially a significant increase, but it's still not going to meet all of the demands out there, really. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have further questions? No? In which case, can I call the first of the public objectors, Neil Dodds? Neil, I think you know the procedure, but you've got 3 minutes and I'll let you know when there's 1 minute left.
Hello, it's Neil Dodds here, and I'm speaking on behalf of Hitchin Forum. This proposed change of use of Anderson House in Florence Street in Hitchin is from sheltered accommodation for 48 elderly people to a hostel for 86 homeless people, typically with complex needs, it said. These include drug and alcohol dependencies, history of criminal offending, and mental health issues. Hitchin Forum strongly objects to this proposal. In our view, its scale makes it unneighbourly and wholly inappropriate in the proposed location. It's just too big and unfair to impose it on this quiet residential area. It would be fine in a city centre perhaps, but not in a quiet Hitchin residential street. In objecting, we believe that we're standing up for the great majority of the neighbours who are understandably very worried about the effect of this major change of use on their and their families' lives. In our view, the statement of need and management in the application neglects the safety and well-being of neighbours. Even now, neighbours are reporting loss of privacy from overlooking, noise and light pollution, which I believe results in the measures set out earlier by Mr. Ray for the southern boundary. For the proposed new use, the police say little. The police who are supposed to, provide one of the consultees' responses, except that they had a meeting with the project team and have satisfied themselves with the development. But where are the minutes of this meeting? What was said and agreed in it? On what basis did the police conclude it was satisfactory? We are also concerned that matters seem to have been unduly advanced and agreed beforehand. The council's website stated in August that the council is pleased to advise that one YMCA have agreed to purchase Anderson House. A neighbour said that he lost the sale of his house because his purchaser phoned planning and was told that the application is likely to succeed. Given this, in what way can North Herts Council be properly dispassionate in dealing with this application? The current Hitchin Hostel for the Homeless at 25 Nightingale Road accommodates up to 17 individuals. One YMCA applied at the end of last year for a new hostel to build on its site, accommodating 23 homeless people. Hitchin Forum did not object to this scheme, which was granted provisional approval in July. Has proper consideration been given to using this agreed and more suitable scheme in terms of size and using Anderson House, or at least its site, for affordable housing, which is very much in demand in Hitchin? And in view of all these concerns, we ask you, the committee, to please refuse this application, or at the very least, defer it until proper consideration is given to the effect on neighbours and on Hitchin residents generally. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the committee have any points of clarification from Neil? No? In which case, could I ask the second public objector, Heather Cotton? Heather, you've got 3 minutes.
I stand here today as a long-standing neighbour to Anderson House, and I have a young family myself. Currently, a complete mix of ages, nationalities and faiths live in Florence Street, Kings Road and Alexandra Road, and it's a wonderful place to live. There are young families, elderly and single people, and it creates an area with character where the community can feel safe and able to live their lives without fear. This is a really delicate balance. We feel very lucky to have such diversity on our doorstep. The local community entirely understands the need for high quality and well-managed settings for vulnerable individuals, which the Anderson House development obviously is. However, what is also important is that these vulnerable people are welcomed by being integrated into the local community, not by forming it themselves. For this reason, we supported the proposed sanctuary development granted earlier this year, which is just around the corner. At 23 bedrooms, it's an appropriate size and scale for the area. For context of numbers, there's around 150 houses on Florence Street, Kings Road and Alexandra Road, which directly border Anderson House. The size and scale of Anderson House development at more than 80 rooms is disproportionate, particularly in addition to the 23 rooms already granted at the sanctuary, and it goes directly against the local plan, specifically policy HS3, which stipulates that schemes for supported and sheltered housing should, and I quote, provide a density, scale and character of development which is appropriate to its location and surroundings. We are so lucky to have the green space of Ransom's Wreck and the Triangle Community Garden so close to our homes. However, these areas already suffer from some antisocial behaviour. The minimal outdoor communal space of this development isn't sufficient for the increase in number and the mobility of the residents, going from a home to the elderly for young adults, who obviously move around more, and this has the potential to impact this valuable community space. There is a thorough security strategy proposed for within Anderson House, but no detail on how this risk will be managed in the local community itself. There's obviously a risk identified as it's been extensively managed within the setting, but this gives little reassurance to the local community. I'm here today to ask for your help to get a rational and objective representation. Me and my fellow neighbours feel that this application has been rushed through by the council through inadequate consultation. There was only one consultation event, which wasn't publicised at all and was held during normal office hours, so many could not attend. I live directly neighbouring the site and I didn't receive any consultation letter at all. We're also concerned of the conflict of interest between the council proposing, supporting and granting this application to achieve their local plan objectives without considering the needs and concerns of their other residents. So I'm appealing for your help to listen and offer a rational and considered view to make a responsible and fair decision to everyone. Please consider deferring your decision or refusing this application to allow for the proper and fair consultation with the local community and a proportionate scheme to be proposed. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Do the committee have any points of clarification for Heather? No? In which case, if I could call Councillor Val Bryant as the ward member objector. Val, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Can I just say, first of all, I'm standing in for Councillor Ian Albert, who cannot be here this evening. And what I will do is, first of all, read out his statement, and then I'll just add a few things based on what I've heard tonight. So this is from Ian. He wrote to Tom Ray, who is the Senior Planning Officer. I would like to call in this application for consideration by the Planning Committee. There is significant public interest in this application, which is the usage that is very different from when the building was owned by Settle. Residents in early consultation have raised with me both parking, noise and issues arising from the overlook into neighbours' properties. It is unclear also to what extent that this application builds on the uses that were agreed when the Anderson House was first built, and whether the change of use is sufficiently broad to understand what extent Anderson House could be used by one YMCA and for what purposes if the application was refused. I am not objecting to the overall principle of the application. This is significant unmet need for homeless accommodation in the district, but I do think some conditions are required. Firstly, I believe residents have legitimate concerns about density of occupation at Anderson House if the application is agreed. The proposed 86 residents is a significant change for the area, and at least a third more people than the sheltered accommodation owned by Settle. When it sits alongside the agreed planning permission for the sanctuary building on Grove Road, potential of the 26 places, this does represent a significant change. I would like to add at this point myself that when I spoke to Guy Foxall early on, when I was talking August, that in fact it was suggested that the sanctuary would not be used for additional accommodation, that it would be used as purely for outreach education work for the Anderson House dwellers. And that would involve the sanctuary being knocked down and rebuilt. This would be in the new building. Back to Ian. Some consideration should be given to a reduced number of residents, at least for a period of time, perhaps at the same level as the sheltered accommodation permission. Secondly, there has been significant recent issues with the lighting at Anderson House and the overlooked neighbouring properties. Conditions are necessary to ensure that there is frosted glass and blinds in the first floor windows, that any security lights do not intrude on the quiet enjoyments of neighbours to enjoy their property. Thirdly, and following the previous issue, some additional security and shielding is necessary between Anderson House and the neighbours' gardens. Hedges should be planted to prevent noise and intrusion. This will prevent some of the problems experienced by residents when living guardians were letting the property from settle. Fourthly, the One YMCA operating regime needs to be clarified, including CCTV, and for the number of staff on duty overnight. It's particularly important in ensuring any noise is reduced to minimum. Finally, residents have raised some concerns around parking issues on Florence Street. My feeling is that the situation would be better than under living guardians, but some further parking spaces may be required above what is proposed. That is Ian's statement.
1 minute, Val.
1 minute, good. Just like to add that One YMCA followed advice from the councillors about the engagement event with residents, which ran from 3 in the afternoon to 7 in the evening one day, and sent round leaflets and so on. Secondly, I do have the information about the police. It's actually on my computer with their detailed feedback. And thirdly, I never ever heard in August anyone referring to this application likely to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bryant. Do the committee have any points of clarification from Val? Councillor Clayton.
Councillor Bryant, you say that you have some feedback from the police. Is that something additional to what we've got access to?
What I've got is a letter which is from a Mark Embleton to, I think it's Tom Ray, which actually several paragraphs laying out the police's view. I've also spoken to Sergeant Taz. What's Taz's official title? Tarambir Gill. Sorry, thank you. About the policing already on Renson's Wreck and the fact this application is coming in.
Okay. Further questions? Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. You made reference, I think, to a conversation with One YMCA back in August and about the potential use of the sanctuary alongside Anderson House. Is that part of the sort of submitted scheme in terms of that potential change of usage, or was that just an idea that was put forward at the time?
At that point, in August, this is when the council found out that, in fact, Anderson House was being sold by Settle to One YMCA. And as part of that conversation, we brought up the fact that One YMCA had already got planning permission on the sanctuary. That planning permission was to actually knock the sanctuary down on the corner of Grove Road, rebuild it so it's up to modern standards for 20-odd residents. And that had actually been given a grant from government, a substantial grant, but the works had to be completed by the end of March 2025, and that was not going to happen. so that that grant would then be transferred to Anderson House, where the timescale could be met. And I'm sure that Mr. Fox will put me right when it's his turn, if I'm wrong, by the end of March 2025, because in fact it didn't actually involve any great works on the building. And so the second part was about the numbers. There are 4 or 5 residents in the sanctuary at the moment. And we met with Hearts Helps Homeless, who actually own that building, and with 1YMCA. And the verdict was that those small number of residents would stay their time there. They wouldn't be thrown out. But in fact, new residents wouldn't come in, that in fact it would be used for outreach work, stroke education for the residents in Anderson House who would need that kind of facility.
Thank you. Councillor Peace.
Yeah, I think you mentioned there were some people living in Anderson House at the moment, the living guardians or something like that. I just wondered if you knew what the occupancy rate is at the moment, so how many people there are at the moment relating to the issues that have been reported.
There are nobody lives at Anderson House at the moment. The Living Guardians is a scheme. It's a business that takes over buildings which are hiatus, that they're waiting to be converted, work's done on them. And so what they do is they take out short leases, very often less about 18 months, and they actually rent out at lowish rents, comparatively lowish rents, on 28-day cycle rents. So the residents know what they're getting because they know they've only ever got 28 days. The Living Guardians were in there, I would say, just over a year. They tended to be young people because they tended to be happy to take that sort of risk. And they had friends. And part of the problems were that there was the parking, for instance, of visitors on Florence Street. But Living Guardians left the building by the end of November. There's nobody there at the moment.
Thank you. Other questions? No? In which case, I will move on to I have both the applicant, Guy. Sorry, yes, I should have said, yeah, nothing personal, Val, but I think you have to leave the room now. I missed out on my moment to do that. I have the applicant, Guy Foxall, and I have the applicant's agent, Louise Morton. I believe you're sharing 5 minutes. I'll leave you to do the division. I'll just tell you when there's a minute left to go. Okay? In your own time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I will need all 5 minutes. My name's Guy. I'm the Chief Executive at the YMCA operating in Hertfordshire. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak at this committee this evening, and also to all the residents who've taken the time to get in touch, to ask questions, and even to invite me into their homes and gardens. Thank you. I genuinely empathise with the thoughtful concerns raised by residents, and I hope I may allay a bit of these this evening, even though I would urge this committee to sift those objections carefully to ensure they are material planning considerations. We've worked closely with key stakeholders, including Homes England, Helping Hearts Homeless and North Herts Council, to secure funding for this project. Anderson House offers our charity a wonderful opportunity to provide essential supported accommodation for local people who have dropped out of their community because of a variety of factors. We help them get back on their feet and reconnect so they can become your neighbours, shopkeepers, baristas, hairdressers, etc. once again. At the outset, it's important to say that 1YMCA could operate from Anderson House without the need for further planning permission, on the basis that we will be providing care to people with a difficult past. But in order to operate a more mixed and balanced facility, we're seeking flexibility to accommodate individuals who do not fall within this narrow definition. For example, a family suddenly in need. And while I hear about the lovely atmosphere that Florence Street, involves, we've been informed that the site has been a real problem for more than 2 years, with a random collection of people brought together without any kind of supervision or support, with the closest operatives being in London. Reports of antisocial behaviour, threatening, noisy activity, crime and a parking nightmare. I can see why local residents would fear that this would continue or worsen under YMCA's care. But this is simply not the case. Our teams get some of the best results in the country, and the way we set ourselves up is totally different from what residents have endured until now. Although we'll be working with a similar cohort to those who've been in the building, I cannot emphasise enough the difference that 24/7, 365 support with a large staff team will make. I've seen rejections that our proposed staff team isn't big enough, but respectfully, it will be larger than highly successful other sites we run. Our team includes support workers, wellbeing workers, housing experts, cooking team, cleaning team, gardening team, employment coaches, chaplains and volunteers. I've seen objections about crime levels. There's little point in talking about current crime levels at the site, as YMCA hasn't even bought it yet. We're not involved there. I saw an objection referencing crime levels dropping in Welwyn when a YMCA site was demolished, but this failed to take into account the youth club nearby on the housing estate, which was also demolished, where that was the main cause of those crime incidents. This is going to result our development in less crime, fewer issues when YMCA buys and operates the site versus what local residents have experienced in the last 2 years of unsupervised rentals. There are objections about density too. Again, these are not founded, as we operate much larger hostels, 180 rooms in Watford, 130 in High Wycombe, 140 in Hatfield, which, by the way, until recently, where we received funding to expand, we operated a successful Ofsted registered daycare nursery at the same site, separated by nothing but a wire fence. This emphasises how safe a well-run hostel can be. Our application highlights the various safety and support measures, so I won't go over those again, but should any local resident have a concern regarding any aspect of the operation of Anderson House, our telephone number will be available 24/7, as will the on-site 24/7 staff in 2 separate manned areas. I'm sorry not everyone could attend our engagement events. However, we will commit to holding another event inside the building once we bought it, so local residents can meet the manager, hear more about what we'll be doing and the kind of great results the team achieves. You'll be able to see the spacious lounges, the support and counselling rooms, the catering area, the training kitchens, plus the outside space, which is considerably better than any of our other sites. And if regular meetings would help, we would be pleased to offer these too. We would love to be part of the community. On parking, the vast majority of our residents do not drive. That's why we're installing bike racks. So we anticipate far fewer cars along Florence Street than we've been used to. Nevertheless, we're increasing parking slightly to be sure to avoid spillover from the site, even when all the staff are there at the same time. So there's no basis for that element of the objection. I do appreciate that you are dealing with plenty of objections and that this is a head decision rather than not a heart decision. However, there are strong voices in the room, and I think these also need to be balanced against those without a voice. Currently, 200 plus local people struggling on street corners, sofa surfing, or in ill-suited emergency accommodation who would add their voice to mine to say they need this site in this location to help turn their lives back around and help them thrive in North Herts once again as they used to. I hope, therefore, committee, that you can see our diligent approach to running successful accommodation settings like this, and indeed much larger, plus the number of measures we're willing to put in place to safeguard and engage with local residents. In turn, I hope this committee will be able to support our planning application as recommended by your officers, so that we can start making a difference to those who need it most in this locality.
Thank you. Do we have any points of clarification for Guy? Councillor McDonnell.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It was just about the comment about families coming to this location. Did I hear that right? And how that would fit with the site being divided into young adults and adults?
I think this is working. Yes, effectively, we would like the site to be as flexible as possible to meet whatever the council is struggling with in terms of their need. So if that were to be young families, for example, I suppose lots of families are young, then we would presently, under the current planning conditions or planning use, not be able to accommodate them, because we would not be providing care, as technically their parents would be providing care, so it would be inappropriate for the children to be on there.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. sort of hark back to this, but just to clarify, I think the points I was trying to get to before, so is the intent then that with this application being successful, the sanctuary would no longer act as accommodation, but would purely be almost a support site to Anderson House?
We're only at this point putting in a change of use for Anderson House. My trustees have not made any further decisions on the sanctuary site.
Okay. Other questions? No? Okay. In which case, may I ask the officer to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Just on a couple of points that Mr. Dodds raised, just to confirm that there is no increase in size for the building, apart from a very small storage building. Sorry, just to cover a couple of points you made, Mr. Dodds. Just to confirm, there is no increase in size to the building, apart from a very small storage building extension. And secondly, the issue raised about the numbers of clients within the building proposed and the general intensity of use. I've covered this in my report at paragraph 4.3.21. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, before I ask the committee to go to debate, Tom, can I ask you to repeat? There was an additional condition 12, but I believe you gave an additional condition as well. Would you mind repeating that for the committee's benefit?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, the condition 12, which was mentioned in the addendum report, that reads as follows: prior to the commencement of the use hereby permitted, full details of a resident nominations agreement for Anderson's House, to include the role of North Hertfordshire District Council as local housing authority, shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The development shall be implemented in perpetuity in accordance with the approved nomination scheme, unless otherwise agreed in writing by the local planning authority. And secondly, Chair, there was the amendment to the recommendation to allow the consultation to be received from the NHS, and if any actions are needed to arise from that, for that to be delegated to the development control manager in consultation with the chair of the planning committee.
Do we have that down? No. Okay, so for the committee, the officer's recommendation is to grant permission with the additional condition 12 as outlined in the supplementary document and the additional condition you've just heard then. Can I have a proposer of a motion to approve, refuse or defer the application? Councillor Mantle.
To progress this, I'm happy to propose that this be granted in accordance with the recommendation from the planning officer.
Thank you. And that includes the conditions. In the conditions. Thank you. That's Councillor Mantle. Do we have a seconder?
Peter second.
Thank you, Councillor Fernandez. In which case we're open for debate. No? Sorry. I thought you were diving for the microphone then, Councillor Claydon. No. Okay. Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I was probably going to refer back to a point I think that Councillor Claydon was raising before about, I believe it was yourself, apologies if it was someone else, around the fencing and the hedges. I think it was to the south of the site. Someone definitely raised it previously. I think, Tom, you mentioned about potentially another condition being added to ensure that there is a sort of certainty of height and coverage that's present at that part of the site there. And I was wondering if it'd be possible to find a form of wording that would sort of solidify that part of the what was mentioned previously to ensure that that is dealt with at that part of the site. Happy to defer to the planning officer about the best way to word that and to cover that, but I think it sounded like it would have been a possibility to include that.
through you, Chair. Yeah, it just would be good to have some indication about what height increase members had in mind, so we can be more precise with any condition. Currently, the fences are around about 1.8 meters. Some parts of them are a little bit higher, so there's a variation in height. And whether or not the condition covers the whole of the southern boundary or part of it.
I think before it was mentioned, I think it was the slightly higher parts to bring it up to that level. I'm not sure you actually gave a figure in the end. I think I thought I wrote something down, but I don't believe I have in the notes. I'm trying to, it just really is if it's possible to have that. If it's not, then probably leave it, but.
It is possible that we could impose a condition requiring a scheme detailing any additional boundary landscaping scheme. 2 meters in height is the permitted development height for fences above which you would need planning permission. Are you, Councillor Nolan, thinking of 2 meters along the whole southern boundary, for example, and that scheme be submitted to achieve that?
I think that is probably what I was be aiming for, yeah.
Perhaps if I could just jot some wording down, Chair, and then come back to you in a moment. Would that be okay?
While Thomas wordsmithing, do we have any other comments or questions? Any items of the debate? Councillor Fernandez.
Just because of the light pollution having been mentioned on the windows that face onto the back of the gardens on Nightingale Road, obviously there's frosted glass and limited opening. Would it be possible to stipulate the use of some kind of blinds or shuttering so that there is no light going into the gardens at night when, affecting the amenity of the adjacent properties, really?
Again, through you, Chair, we did consider that issue, but it's very difficult to enforce, really, and monitor the use of blinds. When should they be down? When should they be opened? Maintenance, that kind of thing. And bearing in mind the building is there already without any blinds or obscure glazing or restricted mechanism, we felt that it was reasonable of the applicant to propose the mitigation measures so far, the obscure glazing and restricted opening, but we didn't think it was reasonable to go as far as blinds.
Tom, do you have any wording? Shall I give you? Do you need a bit more time? Yeah, we can pause. It's fine. Sorry, Councillor Mantle.
Thank you. This is clearly a facility which there is a great need for within the district. I was very disappointed we weren't able to proceed with the corresponding development which was agreed in Letchworth. I think that would have been a great asset to the district. But basically, we've got to trust people who are running this facility to know what they're doing and to do their jobs. And I don't think planning can deal with it if they're not.
Any other further comments while Tom is working on the words? No. Well, I'm happy just to wait a minute until the officers come up with some potential wording for us. Tom.
Yes, Chair. Yes, I've put some wording together and it could read something like this. Prior to the commencement of the use hereby permitted, details of an enhanced boundary treatment along the southern boundary to include a minimum fence height of 2 metres shall be submitted to and approved by the local planning authority, and that the development shall be carried out in accordance with the approved details. And the reason for that would be in the interests of the privacy of adjoining residents.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to repeat that again, slightly slower for the benefit of the minute taker clicking away next to me, if you could, and for the committee so they know what they're voting for.
Yeah. Prior to the commencement of the use hereby permitted, details of an enhanced boundary treatment along the southern boundary to include a minimum fence height of 2 metres shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The development shall be carried out in accordance with the approved details. And the reasoning for the condition would be in the interests of protecting the amenity of adjacent residents. And actually, we could put the policy of the local plan in there to comply with policy D3 of the local plan.
Fine. Councillor Nolan, I think it was you raised a condition. Are you happy with that? Sorry, yeah, Councillor Mantle, are you happy to accept that?
Accept that as an addition to the proposal I put.
Thank you very much. And do we have a seconder for that as amended? Councillor Fernandez.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments? Councillor Claydon. I knew you'd get there in the end.
You don't want to hear from me that much. Just to say that, I mean, as Ian Mantle's already said, I think it's clear that there's a major need. There have been other schemes that have tried to provide or aim to provide this kind of accommodation and haven't succeeded. It is quite clear that the sanctuary at 25 Nightingale Road is not in a good way as a building and as a place for people to live. And this does have the major advantage of being a building that is partitioned in a way which is largely already suitable and needs relatively little work. It's hard to look past that in terms of the possibility of providing much needed accommodation for people in this situation. And I think that what we've heard from One YMCA this evening has been very encouraging. And I think their report, their management plan is detailed, and they clearly have a lot of experience. And on that basis, I think I'll be supporting this. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any further comment? Okay, in which case we'll move to a vote. Just to clarify, we're voting on the proposal to approve the application with the condition, the original conditions plus the condition 12 that was added, plus the condition added by Tom Ray regards health, plus the condition we've just discussed on the fence. And that's, I'm sorry, Councillor Mantle. That is a proposal. Thank you very much. Just so we're all clear what we're voting on. So may we move to the vote on that proposal as amended?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. We have one more item. I don't know. Apologies. I think Councillor Bryant may have left the building, like Elvis. I don't know if members of the public want to leave at this point. There's one more item to do. I'm happy to pause if you want to leave. I'm not trying to get rid of you, but it's been a long evening. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I'll just give it a second. But Is there anything confidential in the next bit? Or can we leave it? Sorry. Okay, I'm assured there's nothing confidential in the next bit. So if I can, item 9, planning appeals, if I could ask Sean Greaves to present.
Thank you, Chair. There's just one item to report, and that's an appeal decision that we've had since last time. And that was an appeal that's been dismissed for the erection of a dwelling at King's Hedges in Hitchin. It doesn't really raise any particular issues of note. It was dismissed due to unacceptable effect upon the character appearance of the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. That report was for noting, so please note it. And with that, I think we're done. I'd like to close the meeting. The next meeting was scheduled for the 19th of December. I believe that has been cancelled. If anyone can confirm. Yes, it's been cancelled. So I only remain to wish you all seasonal greetings when we get there, and we'll meet again in January, I am sure. Thank you very much.